So when you are using the discrete trial, you have these three components of the SD, the response, and the consequence. When you're presenting an SD, it needs to be very concise and consistent. So you are eliminating everything extraneous that you can. Our kids on the spectrum have major difficulties with auditory processing. So you giving traditional, lengthy paragraph instructions is not going to be helpful and not going to be able to help them tune in to exactly what is important, exactly what they need to hear to know what to do. So we literally take all that out and we might just say, what color? That's it. We don't say, oh, look at, I have all these little cards here. We're gonna work on colors, and I have blue and I have red and I have purple. Okay, can you find me the red one? You know, that you might do that with the typical kid, and that might be more fun for them. But for our kid, they just lost all of that. It just went out the door. So we keep it concise and then consistent, which means initially you use the same instruction. And that means across all instructors. So that's why it's so important that you're communicating with each other if you're working with a child. So, and you have what I use is we call it a procedure binder when we have a kid. We have 2, 3, 4 people. We have all the procedures for everything we're working on. We have all the data sheets that we're working on. We have the communication sheets that we're using to communicate to each other, because sometimes you never see each other except for team meetings. And so you want to be sure that everything on those sheets is kept up to date and consistent, that you're communicating with each other. And if things aren't going right, then you come back together and you revisit. What are we doing? Are we sure we're consistent? Are we sure we're using? When you are presenting the SD, you want to be sure you have the child's attention and motivation. And we're going to talk about this. This is a big thing of motivation. But a lot of people don't realize how often they present an instruction when the student is currently in the moment, totally distracted by something else going on. The sensory issues that our kids have can be so difficult and so difficult to compete with when you provide an instruction. And they so much are wanting to do something else that to get them to attend to you long enough to hear the instruction can be difficult. But if you're going to be able to teach them, you have to be able to get their attention, and you do that by increasing their motivation, because you have something that they want to gain if they respond correctly to your instruction. So we're gonna talk more about that. The last two things are things that are most difficult for us as teachers. You provide the instruction only once. You don't repeat and repeat and repeat. Right away, our students learn, oh, I don't care, she'll repeat herself, I'll just do it when I feel like it, because you just keep repeating yourself. Same thing as a parent, you think, oh man, and then you get mad at the kid. I just told you 5 times to do that. Well, really, whose fault is that? You! Because you shouldn't be telling him 5 times. There should be a consequence after the first time you tell him that he doesn't follow the instructions. Then you need to be implementing some sort of consequence that makes him learn, okay, I responded the first time. So only once, so that you don't train that habit in them of just sitting there and you repeating yourself. You also do not use the student's name when you're giving the instruction. One of the things that happens if you're starting off, especially this happens when you're teaching in a one-on-one setting, and it's very easy to use their name because that's the only child you're working with. But the minute you go to 1-on-2, 1-on-3, 1-on-5, 1-on-10, are you going to be continuing to repeat all the students' names when you give the instruction? No. So what happens is that in that one-on-one setting, you're saying their name, they learn, I only attend when I hear my name. When I get into a group and I don't hear my name, I don't have to attend. So you want to train them to be able to respond to an instruction that doesn't have their name. They need to learn, I am going to respond and I will be reinforced for responding. Now, sometimes when you get their attention, any kid that might not be attending at the moment, you may say their name. But it shouldn't always be the only way you get their attention before you give the instruction either. Then you wait for the response and you obtain it. Know the correct response. I can't tell you how oftentimes people think, oh, yeah, whatever. No, so many people don't. They have in their mind, they didn't pay attention when we were in the team meeting or whatever. They're not clear, and then they get in the moment and the student kind of does it, and they're like, shoot, is that what I'm supposed to accept as correct, or should I be taking it as incorrect and we go through a correction procedure? I need to do prompting, and you want to be sure that everybody clearly understands what you're accepting. You want to make sure it's not chained with anything else. So many of our kids maybe we're teaching clapping, because in circle time we do songs of clapping, and kids will respond by, oh, I'm doing this. And then just because they did clapping, you say, oh, great job. But now they just learned that all those things are clapping. You just reinforced all of them together as one behavior. So you can't accept anything except only that behavior. And that's a really hard thing. I'm like, oh, wait a second. You just totally reinforced something different than clapping. They're like, oh, no, wait, he just clapped. I'm like, and he tapped his head, and he patted his stomach. So what does he think clapping is right now? Right? A baseball routine. So you want to be sure it's not chained with anything else. Another thing that happens is if they do the clapping, maybe that's what they did, and we're too long in providing the reinforcement to say correct, and in the meantime they do a whole bunch of other things. They start singing, they start clapping to them, it means a favorite song that they have, and then they start doing other things, and then you give them the reinforcement. So now they just chained at the end all these other things, and then you reinforce them. So it's a really complicated thing to think about when, okay, wait a second. And then this is another thing when people, how long do I wait? Well, each child has their own kind of processing time. Now, it's very easy once you get to know the child, you can tell often by just how they're behaving, how they're looking, what they're doing. Are they in the moment just not responding, or are they thinking? One of the things about using materials, a skill that you develop, is to have them scan so that you know that they're attending. A lot of our kids on the spectrum don't scan materials, and if they're not scanning, you can't ensure that a response that you're getting is actually a correct response, because it may just be coincidence, or they may be getting it always wrong because they're not scanning. So if I have a kid who I give an SD, and he's really looking and really thinking, I will wait longer because he's processing, he's trying to figure it out. If I have another kid who I give a question with materials out, and he's just sitting there staring, or then he looks up and looks over there, I'm giving the consequence immediately, because he's engaging immediately in no response or an incorrect response, and I have to give that feedback to him. So you really think about what you know about that child. Sometimes it's a difficult task that takes time to complete as well. So as long as they're continuing, maybe they're slow in the beginning, maybe later you're going to have to work on fluency so that they increase their ability to, complete the task more quickly. But in the beginning, you want to judge by where they are with thinking. The consequence needs to be immediate. Like I was just talking about, the reinforcement has to be immediate. And you want this, and we're going to talk about more about this, you're using differential reinforcement. More reinforcement sometimes, less reinforcement other times, depending on what you're requiring of them. Okay? Do not reinforce incorrect responses. It's very easy for us to forget that we just reinforced because we did something. Maybe we ended the task and let them go have a break just when they got something wrong, or they chained it with something else. So being very careful about the feedback that you give them. Correction procedure is also something that happens here, and we're going to talk about that at the end. If they get it incorrectly, immediately you're flowing into that correction procedure as your teaching tool for how to get them back to that correct response. Okay, discrete trial is great for all of us. There's no environment you can't do it in. It might be different times that you might be using it or not using it, but it's it's not something that you think of only when I'm sitting at a table. A lot of people thought that was like discrete trial. Why don't I do that now when we're sitting at the table? But when we're not, I'm like, well, how did it get connected just to sitting at the table?